Hello everyone, welcome to the Sleeping Times channel. Tonight, we bring you a story that will transport you directly to the medieval streets of London in September 1666, where you will discover how an entire city faced its greatest ordeal and emerged stronger and more beautiful than ever. Imagine waking up on a cold dawn and discovering that everything you've built over a lifetime could disappear in just 4 days. Where families who never spoke to each other united like siblings in the face of common danger, forging bonds of solidarity that transcended all social barriers. Where destruction was not the end, but the beginning of something even more extraordinary. What if I told you that before modern firefighters and security systems, people not only survived unimaginable catastrophes, but discovered reserves of courage, creativity, and compassion they didn't even know they possessed? Can you imagine what it would be like to lose everything and still find hope in the ashes? What would it be like to rebuild not just homes, but an entire civilization with your own hands? Discover how the Londoners of 1666 transformed the greatest tragedy in their history into an opportunity to create a safer, more beautiful, and more humane city. If you enjoy stories that move you, surprise you, and make you reflect on the incredible human capacity for overcoming adversity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss anything. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. And tell me, have you ever been through a situation where you lost something important and discovered you were stronger than you imagined? And remember, every week we bring new historical adventures and timeless lessons waiting to inspire you. Are you ready to walk through the burning streets of medieval London and discover how an entire people learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what truly matters? So, make yourself comfortable, turn off the lights if you want a more immersive experience, and prepare for a journey through fire and renewal that will change your perspective on what it truly means to start over. In the cold dawn of September 1666, London slowly awoke under a sky still tinged with the last stars. The narrow, winding streets of the medieval city began to stir with the soft sound of the first footsteps on the uneven cobblestones. The air carried the familiar aroma of fresh bread being prepared in bakeries, mingled with the sweet scent of wood burning in domestic fireplaces. Timber and plaster houses rose in compact rows, their intertwined structures creating a cozy labyrinth of alleys and inner courtyards. Thatched and clay-tiled roofs almost touched each other, forming a unique urban landscape where sunlight filtered through the gaps between buildings. In the small windows with thick, uneven glass panes, candles flickered softly, creating a golden and comforting atmosphere. The River Thames flowed majestically south of the city, its dark waters reflecting the first morning light. Fishing boats and merchant vessels gently swayed, anchored by the wooden docks, where traders were already beginning to unload their goods. The rhythmic sound of waves against the wooden pillars created a natural melody that echoed through the streets near the river. In taverns and inns, the first customers warmed themselves by crackling fireplaces, savoring warm ale and buttered bread, while conversing in low tones about the day's business. The scent of roasted meat and exotic spices, imported from the east, perfumed the air, creating an atmosphere of comfort and familiarity that characterized London life at the time. Artisans opened their workshops with precise and careful movements, arranging their tools on wooden workbenches polished by use. Blacksmiths, carpenters, shoemakers, and weavers prepared for another day of honest labor, their skilled hands already anticipating the familiar gestures of their trades. The metallic clang of hammers and the creak of loom wheels began to compose the city's morning symphony. Women emerged from their homes carrying wicker baskets for market shopping, their long wool skirts gently brushing against the cobblestones. Their faces, protected by white linen coifs, radiated the serenity of those who knew every stone, every corner, every neighbor in their community. The central market was already bustling with vendors hawking their wares in melodious voices. Children ran through the streets in joyful groups, their bare feet familiar with every unevenness of the paving, every puddle, every secret hiding spot between the houses. Their crystalline laughter echoed through the inner courtyards, mingling with the sound of church bells, marking the hours with their celestial music. Childhood in medieval London had its own rhythm, dictated by the seasons and natural light. Churches punctuated the urban landscape with their stone towers and bronze bells, creating both physical and spiritual landmarks for the inhabitants. The sound of the bells not only marked the hours, but also summoned the community for moments of prayer and reflection, creating a sacred cadence that permeated all aspects of city life. The inner gardens of wealthier homes exuded the scent of aromatic herbs and seasonal flowers, creating small oases of tranquility amidst the urban bustle. Climbing roses adorned the wooden walls, while well-tended vegetable patches provided fresh seasonings for family meals. These green spaces were peaceful retreats where families gathered at the end of the day. On this seemingly ordinary September morning, no one could have imagined that in a few hours, this medieval London, with all its rustic beauty and pulsating life, would begin to transform forever. Fate was already drawing its silent plans, preparing a lesson on the fragility of material things and the unbreakable strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. On narrow Pudding Lane, one of the many alleys that snaked through the commercial heart of London, Thomas Farriner's bakery exuded the comforting aroma of fresh bread that had been taken from the ovens in the early hours of the morning. The embers still crackled softly in the large stone oven, radiating a welcoming warmth that contrasted with the coolness of the September morning. The establishment, like many others of its time, combined residence and workplace in a harmony typical of medieval urban life. The bakery's wooden walls, darkened by time and oven smoke, held decades of family stories and traditions. Sacks of wheat flour were neatly stacked in the corners, while wooden shelves displayed loaves of bread in different shapes and sizes. The sweet smell of fermented dough mingled with the aroma of spices that bakers use to create their special recipes, passed down from generation to generation. During the night, while the city slept soundly, something began to stir in the seemingly extinguished embers of the main oven. A small, almost imperceptible spark found combustible material among the remnants of firewood and straw that had accumulated near the heating structure. Fire, an element so essential to daily life at the time, was beginning to show its wildest and most unpredictable face. The first flames emerged discreetly, licking the dry wood with hypnotic and silent movements. The fire grew slowly, feeding on the abundant wood that made up not only the bakery's structure but also the neighbouring houses. In London of 1666, wood was the predominant building material, creating a city that, unbeknownst to its inhabitants, was a gigantic fuel source merely awaiting a spark. The night wind, which blew gently from the east, began to gradually intensify, carrying with it the subtle smell of smoke that still caused no concern. The dry gusts of air, typical of that year's exceptionally hot late summer, found a powerful ally in the nascent flames. The combination of dry wood, constant wind, and densely packed urban structures created the perfect conditions for a tragedy. In the neighbouring houses, families slept peacefully in their wooden beds, covered by wool and linen quilts. The small, cosy rooms, warmed by the embers of domestic fireplaces, provided a safe refuge from the cold of the early morning. No one realised that just a few metres away, a phenomenon that would forever change the face of London was gaining strength and speed. The first tongues of fire began to spread across the wooden beams of the bakery's ceiling, creating a spectacle of dancing lights that dramatically contrasted with the darkness of the night. The soft sound of the fire consuming the dry wood mingled with the wind blowing through the narrow streets, creating an ominous symphony that still did not attract the attention of the sleeping residents. The cats wandering the streets during the night were the first to notice that something was different. Their keen instincts picked up the growing smell of smoke and the increasingly intense sound of the flames. Some silently fled to safer locations, while others remained watching with feline curiosity the phenomenon unfolding in the Pudding Lane bakery. The wooden structures began to crackle softly under the rising heat. producing sounds that blended with the crackling of the flames. The temperature inside the bakery gradually rose, creating warm air currents that further intensified the combustion. The fire, which had begun as a small forgotten ember, now gained a life of its own and enough strength to spread beyond its point of origin. As the first rays of sun began to lighten the London horizon, tinting the sky with pink and gold hues, a new light also illuminated Pudding Lane. It was the orange glow of the flames that, in a few hours, would transform an ordinary September morning into a date that would be remembered forever in London's history. The Great Fire was just beginning, and the city still slept, unaware of the fate that awaited it. The first screams echoed through the narrow streets as dense smoke began to infiltrate through the cracks of windows and doors of houses near Pudding Lane. The acrid, penetrating smell awoke residents from their peaceful sleep, making them jump out of bed with racing hearts and an instinctive sense of danger. Families quickly gathered, still in their nightclothes, trying to understand the origin of the smoke that made the air increasingly difficult to breathe. Through the small, misty windows, the first observers could see the orange flames that had already completely consumed the bakery and were beginning to spread to adjacent buildings. The fire danced with a hypnotic and terrifying energy, climbing the wooden walls with a speed that surprised even those who had witnessed smaller fires before. The golden and red light of the flames created dancing shadows in the streets, transforming the familiar landscape into an almost unreal scene. Women rushed to wake their children, wrapping them in blankets and quilts, while whispering words of reassurance that they themselves did not feel. The children, still sleepy and confused, clung to their mothers' skirts, their large, frightened eyes reflecting the orange light that intensified with each passing minute. Maternal instinct spoke louder than fear, and each mother focused on keeping her family united and safe. Men went out into the streets to better assess the situation, their tense faces illuminated by the growing glow of the flames. Some tried to organize buckets of water in a human chain, passing the containers from hand to hand in a desperate attempt to fight the fire that had already grown beyond any control their efforts could exert. The sound of water boiling as it touched the flames created clouds of steam that mixed with the smoke, making the air even denser and more suffocating. The church bells began to ring at a rapid and irregular pace, a sound everyone recognized as a general alarm signal. The bronze of the bells vibrated with urgency, creating a desperate music that echoed throughout the city and awoke even the residents furthest from the initial focus of the fire. It was a call that transcended words, a universal language of danger that mobilized the entire community. In the streets, panic began to spread as quickly as the flames themselves. People ran in opposite directions, some trying to get closer to help fight the fire, others fleeing with their most precious belongings. The sound of hurried footsteps on the cobblestones mingled with shouts of direction and the cries of children, creating a cacophony that reflected the growing chaos of the situation. Merchants whose shops were near the fire began to quickly remove their goods, loading fabrics, spices, tools, and other items onto improvised carts, or simply carrying them in their arms. The value of a lifetime's work was being hastily transported through the streets in a desperate procession of people trying to save what they could of their material existence. Local authorities, still trying to grasp the magnitude of what was happening, rushed back and forth, giving orders that were lost in the general turmoil. Guards tried to maintain some order in the streets, but the force of human nature in the face of danger was more powerful than any attempt at control. The city began to reveal its true face. Not a collection of buildings and streets, but a community of people united by a common destiny. The wind continued to blow with increasing intensity, scattering incandescent sparks that landed on distant rooftops like seeds of destruction. Each new spark that found combustible material created a new fire source, multiplying the problem exponentially. The medieval city, built for coziness and protection, now revealed its vulnerability to the uncontrollable force of fire. As the sun rose on the horizon, its natural light competed with the artificial glow of the flames spreading through the city. It was the beginning of a day that would be unlike any other in London's history, a day when every inhabitant would discover what they were capable of, when everything they knew and loved was threatened. Fear had awakened, but along with it, human courage in the face of adversity also awoke. The September wind blew with an intensity that seemed to have a life of its own, carrying not only the crisp autumn air, but also incandescent sparks that transformed each gust into a sowing of destruction. The hot air currents created by the fire itself mingled with the natural wind, generating whirlwinds that lifted embers and ashes to impressive heights before depositing them on distant rooftops, creating new fire outbreaks in places that moments before seemed safe. The flames, fueled by the abundant oxygen brought by the wind, gained a strength and speed that surprised even the most experienced firefighters of the time. The fire not only consumed the wooden structures, but seemed to dance with them, climbing the walls in serpentine and hypnotic movements, leaping from one house to another with an agility that defied any human attempt at containment. The sound of the fire transformed into a terrifying yet fascinating symphony. The constant crackling of wood being consumed, the whistling of the wind passing through the burning structures, the occasional roar of beams giving way under the intense heat, and the deep, primitive rumble of the fire itself as it found new materials to devour. It was a music that spoke directly to humanity's most primitive instincts, awakening both terror and a strange admiration for the force of nature. The streets filled with a golden and red light that transformed the familiar urban landscape into an almost supernatural scene. Shadows danced on the still intact walls, creating fantastic shapes that constantly moved and transformed. The air vibrated with intense heat, creating waves of visual distortion that made distant buildings seem to shimmer like desert mirages. Thick smoke rose in majestic columns that disappeared into the clouds, creating a spectacle visible for miles around. This grey, dense curtain not only obscured vision, but also carried the penetrating smell of burnt wood, leather, fabrics, and all the materials that made up the daily life of medieval London. It was an aroma that would forever be etched in the memory of all who breathed it. The heat radiated by the flames became so intense that people could not approach within several tens of meters of the main fire sources. The hot air created updrafts that lifted dust, ashes, and small debris, forming small tornadoes of incandescent material that danced through the streets like spirits of fire. The ambient temperature rose so much that even at a considerable distance, people felt their faces burn and their eyes water. Metal structures began to deform under the extreme heat, creating strange and melancholic metallic sounds that mingled with the general cacophony of the fire. Church bells cracked with the heat, producing dissonant notes that echoed through the city like laments. Iron tools bent and melted, transforming into abstract shapes that bore witness to the transformative power of fire. The River Thames, which had always been a source of life and commerce for London, now became a desperately sought refuge. Its dark waters reflected the orange glow of the flames, creating a liquid mirror that duplicated the spectacle of destruction. Boats of all sizes filled with people and belongings, transforming the river into a floating escape route where entire families sought safety away from the reach of the flames. Birds that inhabited London's rooftops and towers flew in disoriented flocks, their instincts confused by the artificial light and the smoke that obscured the sky. Some fell, overcome by the inhalation of toxic smoke, while others managed to escape to more distant areas, carrying with them the visual news of the disaster to neighbouring communities that had not yet been alerted. As the hours passed, it became clear that this was not an ordinary fire that could be controlled with the traditional methods of the time. It was a force of nature that had found the perfect conditions to manifest in all its destructive and transformative power. The city of London was being tested by the elements, and each inhabitant discovered, moment by moment, what their own courage was made of in the face of the uncontrollable. In the streets that still remained safe, yet already threatened by the inexorable approach of the flames, entire families began to emerge from their homes carrying what belongings they could. It was a touching, and at the same time majestic spectacle. People of all ages walking in silent processions, each carrying what they considered most precious in their lives. Small children hugged cloth dolls, while adults carried wooden chests containing documents, family jewels, and memories of past generations. The women, their long skirts gently swaying as they walked, displayed surprising serenity in the face of adversity. Many carried babies in their arms while guiding older children by the hand, whispering words of encouragement and humming soft songs to calm the little ones. Their faces, illuminated by the distant glow of the flames, revealed a silent determination that spoke of the inner strength that emerges in the most difficult moments of human existence. The men took turns carrying the heaviest belongings: small furniture, work tools, sacks of grain, and other essential goods to rebuild life elsewhere. Their movements were calculated and efficient, the result of a practical wisdom that knew how to distinguish between the essential and the superfluous when every minute was precious. Some pushed wooden carts loaded to the brim, creating small family caravans that moved slowly through the stone streets. The elderly, leaning on canes or the arms of younger relatives, walked with the dignity of those who had already faced many storms in life. Their eyes, though worried, carried a serene wisdom that understood the transient nature of material things. Many murmured prayers in low voices, their words mingling with the soft sound of footsteps on the stones, creating an atmosphere of collective spirituality. The streets transformed into human rivers flowing towards the safer areas of the city and the open fields beyond the medieval walls. The movement was orderly and respectful, with people helping each other carry heavy burdens and offering words of comfort to their most distressed neighbors. It was as if adversity had awakened the best of human nature, revealing a solidarity that transcended social and economic differences. Domestic animals accompanied their human families on this journey. Loyal dogs walked beside their owners, cats were carried in wicker baskets, and even some chickens and goats were led through the streets in a procession that mixed the practical with the touching. These animals, an integral part of domestic life at the time, represented not only economic value, but also emotional bonds that families were unwilling to abandon. Artisans carried their most precious tools, instruments that represented not only their livelihood, but also family traditions passed down from father to son through generations. Hammers, chisels, sewing needles, and other work implements were transported with the same care given to the most valuable treasures, for they represented the ability to rebuild life anywhere. Merchants pushed carts laden with their most valuable goods: fine fabrics, exotic spices, rare books, and other items that represented connections to the world beyond London. These objects carried stories of distant travels, commercial exchanges, and dreams of prosperity that now needed to find a new home away from the flames consuming their original establishments. The children, despite the natural fear of the unknown, showed an admirable capacity for adaptation, turning the journey into an adventure and helping to carry small objects with a sense of responsibility that surprised the adults. Their voices, occasionally rising in children's songs, brought moments of lightness and hope to the procession, reminding everyone that life would continue beyond this ordeal. As the day progressed and the processions stretched along the roads leading out of the city, an image was created that would forever be etched in London's collective memory, that of an entire people on the move, carrying not only their belongings, but also their dignity, their hope, and their determination to rebuild everything necessary to continue living with purpose and meaning. In the green fields, stretching beyond London's medieval walls, small temporary communities began to spring up like mushrooms after rain. Families who had lost their homes gathered in groups, forming welcoming circles where they shared not only physical space, but also their stories, their fears, and their hopes. The scent of fresh grass and wildflowers contrasted dramatically with the acrid smell of smoke still drifting from the city, creating a sensory blend that symbolized the transition between destruction and renewal. Improvised tents, made from sheets, blankets, and scraps of fabric, spread across the meadows like colorful flowers, each representing a family that had found a creative way to create a new temporary home. The women, with their natural ability to transform any space into a welcoming environment, organized these refuges with maternal care, creating small corners where children could play and adults could rest after the exhausting journey of escape. Small, controlled bonfires dotted the landscape at dusk, each surrounded by families sharing simple meals prepared with ingredients they had managed to save from their homes. The soft sound of conversations mingled with the comforting crackle of wood burning in a controlled manner, creating an atmosphere of intimacy and communion that contrasted with the destructive chaos they had left behind in the city. The children, with their natural capacity for adaptation and discovery, transformed the fields into enormous natural playgrounds. They ran between the tents, played hide-and-seek behind trees, and collected wildflowers to give to their mothers, bringing moments of pure joy that reminded everyone that life continued and that happiness could be found even in the most difficult circumstances. The men naturally organized themselves into working groups, some going on reconnaissance expeditions to assess the fire's progress in the city, others dedicating themselves to building more solid shelters for their families, and still others organizing the distribution of food and water among all the refugees. It was a spontaneous demonstration of community leadership that revealed how adversity could awaken the best of human nature. Musicians who had managed to save their instruments offered impromptu performances that lifted the morale of the entire temporary community. The sound of flutes, lutes, and drums echoed across the fields, creating a soundtrack of hope that helped people forget, even momentarily, the losses they had suffered. Music, the universal language of the human soul, served as a balm that healed invisible wounds. Generous merchants shared their salvage goods with those who had lost everything, creating an informal system of exchange and solidarity that worked better than any formal economy. Fabrics were distributed to make clothes and blankets, food was shared in communal meals, and tools were lent to help build temporary shelters. The more experienced women naturally became the organizers of medical care and the general well-being of the community, using their knowledge of medicinal herbs and home remedies to treat minor injuries and calm frayed nerves. Their skilled hands prepared soothing teas with plants gathered from the fields, offering not only physical relief, but also the emotional comfort of being cared for by someone. Storytellers naturally emerged among the refugees, sharing ancient tales and legends that helped pass the time and keep the community's oral tradition alive. Their melodious voices narrated adventures of heroes who had overcome great adversities, offering inspiring examples of courage and perseverance that resonated deeply with the current situation of all listeners. As the stars appeared in the night sky, free from the smoke that obscured the city, families gathered in their temporary shelters for collective prayers and moments of silent reflection. It was a time of gratitude for the safety found, of mourning for the losses suffered, and of renewed hope for the future that was yet to be built. In the fields around London, a new community was being born from the ashes of the old, stronger and more united than ever. While the flames mercilessly devoured the wooden structures that made up most of medieval London, some buildings stood as islands of resistance amidst the ocean of fire. The ancient churches, built with massive blocks of limestone extracted from English quarries, stood firm against the advance of the flames, their thick walls and imposing towers serving as beacons of hope for those observing the destruction from a distance. St. Paul's Cathedral, majestic in its Gothic architecture, bravely resisted the intense heat that surrounded it on all sides. Its stone walls, built to last centuries, absorbed the heat without yielding, while its stained glass windows reflected the orange light of the external flames, creating a spectacle of colors that blended the sacred with the earthly. The bronze bells in its tower continued to ring, their metallic sounds echoing through the city as calls of resistance and faith. Other smaller churches, scattered throughout the affected neighborhoods, also demonstrated the wisdom of the medieval builders, who had chosen stone as the material for the community's most important buildings. Their cool, silent naves offered temporary refuge for those who had not managed to fully escape the city, transforming into both physical and spiritual sanctuaries during the most difficult hours of the fire. The ancient walls surrounding parts of the city, built by the Romans centuries earlier and reinforced over generations, also resisted the advance of the flames. These millennia-old structures, witnesses to countless historical transformations, now served as natural barriers that helped contain the spread of the fire in certain directions. creating safe corridors that allowed the movement of people and more effective firefighting. Some noble mansions, built with a combination of stone and superior quality wood, managed to partially resist the fire. Their stone foundations and thicker walls offered greater protection, although their wooden roofs and luxurious interiors were vulnerable to the flames. These residences became privileged observation points from which it was possible to monitor the fire's progress and coordinate rescue efforts. The stone bridges crossing the Thames, especially the famous London Bridge with its houses and shops built on the structure, presented a unique spectacle of resistance and vulnerability. While the stone structure of the bridge remained intact, the wooden constructions on it burned intensely, creating a surreal vision of a river of fire suspended over a river of water. Warehouses built with stone walls managed to partially protect the goods stored inside, although the intense heat still posed a threat to sensitive products like fabrics, spices, and grains. These buildings became improvised centers for distributing supplies for firefighting efforts and assisting refugees. Ancient watchtowers and fortifications, built to withstand military attacks, now demonstrated their usefulness against a different but equally relentless enemy. Their robust structures offered secure observation points from which it was possible to monitor the fire's progress and coordinate evacuation and firefighting strategies. Monasteries and convents, with their solid constructions and inner courtyards protected by high walls, became refuges for hundreds of people seeking safety. The religious inhabitants of these places opened their doors to everyone, offering not only physical shelter, but also spiritual comfort through collective prayers and words of encouragement. Public buildings like guild halls and covered markets, built with mixed stone and wood structures, showed varying degrees of resistance depending on their specific construction. Those with a higher proportion of stone managed to maintain their structural integrity, while others partially succumbed to the flames, creating ruins that still offered some protection against the intense heat. These stone bastions not only physically resisted the fire, but also served as powerful symbols of continuity and permanence amidst destruction. They reminded everyone that, although much could be lost, some things were built to last, and that human wisdom in choosing appropriate materials and construction techniques could make the difference between preservation and total destruction. They were silent witnesses that, even in the darkest moments, there was always hope that something would remain to tell the story and serve as a foundation for reconstruction. In the still safe streets of London, where the fire had not yet arrived, but its threat hung in the air like a tangible presence, something extraordinary began to happen. People who had never spoken before, separated by differences in social class, profession, or origin, began to unite in a spontaneous display of human solidarity that transcended all artificial barriers created by society. It was as if the common danger had dissolved the invisible boundaries that normally divided the community. Wealthy merchants opened their homes to artisan families who had lost everything, offering not only temporary shelter, but also warm meals and clean clothes. Their wives, who normally moved in exclusive social circles, now found themselves side by side with simple women, together preparing large pots of soup and organizing donated clothes to distribute among those in need. Class differences seemed insignificant in the face of the basic human need to help one's neighbor. Skilled artisans offered their services for free to repair broken carts, mend clothes torn during the escape, or build temporary shelters for those who had nowhere to go. Their skilled hands, normally dedicated to paid work, now moved with the same precision and care in tasks that would bring no financial return. Only the deep satisfaction of helping fellow humans in distress. Children from different families played together in the streets, their innocent laughter creating moments of lightness amidst the general tension. They shared toys, invented new games, and comforted each other when fear became too intense. It was a pure demonstration of how childhood could overcome prejudices and differences that adults sometimes took a lifetime to overcome. Bakers who still had access to their ovens worked day and night to produce enough bread to feed not only their usual customers, but also all the refugees constantly arriving from the fire-affected areas. The comforting aroma of fresh bread spread through the streets as a symbol of hope and continuity, reminding everyone that normal life was still possible and would be restored, Doctors and healers moved tirelessly among the refugees, treating minor injuries, offering remedies to calm frayed nerves, and simply offering their comforting presence to those who needed someone to talk to about their losses. Their leather bags filled with medicinal herbs and simple instruments became symbols of healing and care amidst the chaos. Street musicians positioned themselves at strategic corners, offering free performances that lifted the spirits of everyone who passed by. Their familiar melodies created a soundtrack of normalcy and beauty that contrasted with the distant sounds of destruction, offering moments of transcendence that nourished the soul as much as food nourished the body. Textile merchants freely distributed materials so that women could sew new clothes to replace those lost in the fire. Their shops transformed into community centers, where groups of women gathered to sew, talk, and support each other, creating a network of emotional support that was as valuable as the material aid they offered. Tavern owners kept their doors open day and night, offering warm drinks and simple meals to anyone who needed them, regardless of their ability to pay. Their establishments became information centers where news about the fire's progress was shared and where mutual aid plans were organized spontaneously and efficiently. Strong young people organized themselves into groups to help transport heavy belongings, build temporary shelters, and distribute supplies. Their energy and enthusiasm became valuable resources that were automatically directed to where they were most needed, without the need for formal organization or external supervision. This wave of solidarity was not organized by any authority or institution, but sprang naturally from the human heart in the face of shared adversity. It was a powerful demonstration that when circumstances demand the best from people, humanity is capable of transcending its limitations and differences to create something greater and more beautiful than the sum of its individual parts. Amidst the physical destruction, a community was being born in London, stronger and more united than it had known in times of prosperity. When the last flames finally extinguished after 4 days of uncontrollable fury, a deep and almost sacred silence descended upon London like a velvet cloak. It was a silence unlike any other the city had experienced. Not the peaceful quiet of dawn or Sunday rest, but a silence laden with meaning, pregnant with possibilities, and heavy with the weight of transformation. The air, finally free of dense smoke, revealed a landscape that seemed to belong to another world, where once stood compact rows of wooden houses with their thatched roofs and smoking chimneys. Now stretched a vast field of ashes and rubble that glowed softly under the golden light of the morning sun. The ruins created a new and strange topography, with mounds of blackened stones and charred wooden beams rising like skeletons of a lost civilization. It was a lunar landscape in the heart of one of Europe's most vibrant cities. The first brave explorers who ventured back into the devastated areas walked slowly among the debris, their footsteps echoing strangely in the open space that was once a labyrinth of narrow streets. Each step raised small clouds of fine ash that danced in the air like stardust, creating ephemeral trails that marked human passage through the desolation. The scent that hung in the air was complex and evocative. Burnt wood mingled with the metallic aroma of melted iron, the sweet and sad smell of charred fabrics, and an underlying note of heated stone that spoke of the intensity of the heat that had transformed everything. It was a unique perfume of transformation that would forever be etched in the olfactory memory of all who breathed it. Small treasures occasionally emerged from the rubble. A silver spoon, blackened but still recognizable. A fragment of decorated pottery that had resisted the heat. A deformed but still functional iron tool. These objects, unlikely survivors of the catastrophe, were collected with reverence by their former owners, who held them like precious relics of their former lives. The stone churches that had resisted the fire now stood like cathedrals in a desert, their towers punctuating the empty horizon with renewed majesty. Their bells occasionally rang, creating echoes that spread much further than before, without the barriers of buildings to absorb the sound. It was as if the very acoustics of the city had been transformed, creating a new urban music made of open spaces and distant reverberations. Groups of families gathered at the sites where their homes had once stood, not in lament, but in a kind of silent ceremony of recognition and farewell. Some people knelt and touched the ashes with their hands, as if blessing the earth that had sustained their lives for so long. It was a spontaneous ritual of gratitude and acceptance that spoke of the deep wisdom of the human heart in the face of loss. Children, with their natural ability to find wonder in any situation, began to explore this new world with cautious curiosity. They collected interesting pieces of melted glass that had transformed into artistic shapes and discovered that their voices echoed in new and interesting ways in the open space. Their occasional laughter brought life and hope to the silent landscape. Artists and poets who had survived the fire walked through the devastation with eyes that saw beyond the apparent destruction. They perceived a melancholic beauty in the ruins, a poetry of transformation that spoke of the cyclical nature of existence. Some began to sketch or compose verses, capturing the essence of this unique moment in the city's history. The River Thames continued to flow undisturbed, its dark waters now reflecting a wider and more open sky than had been visible in centuries. Boats slowly navigated the river, their occupants observing in respectful silence the transformation of the bank they knew so well. The river, an eternal witness to London's history, now witnessed the birth of a new era. This silence was not empty, but full of potential. It was the silence of the earth prepared for new sowing, the silence of the blank page awaiting a new story, the silence of dawn before the day reveals all its possibilities. London had been transformed, and in this moment of profound quiet, everyone could feel that something new and extraordinary was about to be born from the ashes of the past. In the months that followed the Great Fire, London began to rise from its ashes like a majestic phoenix, revealing a capacity for renewal that surprised even its own inhabitants. The first constructions that emerged from the devastation were not mere reproductions of what had been lost, but structures conceived and planned with a wisdom born from the experience of destruction. Visionary architects like Christopher Wren walked through the empty streets with rolls of parchment under their arms, their eyes gleaming with the vision of a new and more beautiful city. The new constructions followed strict regulations that required the use of brick and stone instead of wood, creating a more uniform and elegant urban landscape. Streets were widened and straightened, allowing for better air circulation and light, and creating architectural perspectives that transformed simple walks into aesthetic experiences. The sound of hammers and saws constantly echoed through the city, creating a symphony of reconstruction that spoke of hope and determination. Families who had lost everything discovered reserves of strength and creativity they didn't know they possessed. Women who had never worked outside the home became skilled merchants, selling homemade goods in the temporary markets that sprouted like flowers in vacant lots. Men who had been specialized artisans learned new professions, adapting to the needs of reconstruction with a flexibility that revealed the true resilient nature of the human spirit. The children who had experienced the fire grew up with a unique perspective on life, understanding early on that change was a constant and that adaptation was an essential virtue. They played among the construction sites, their games naturally incorporating the sounds and rhythms of building, creating a generation that saw transformation not as a threat, but as an opportunity for growth and improvement. The community bonds forged during the days of crisis strengthened even further during the reconstruction period. Neighbors who had helped each other during the evacuation continued to collaborate in building their new homes, creating an informal system of cooperation that made the work more efficient and joyful. The sound of conversations and laughter on the construction sites created an atmosphere of collective celebration of life being reborn. Merchants who had lost their shops discovered opportunities in new locations and with new products, adapting their businesses to the needs of the rebuilding city. Temporary markets spread across squares and empty lots, creating a dynamic and flexible economy that responded quickly to changes. The smell of spices, new fabrics, and freshly forged tools gradually began to replace the persistent aroma of ashes. The new St. Paul's Cathedral, designed by Christopher Wren to replace the medieval structure damaged by the fire, began to rise as a majestic symbol of London's renewal. Its revolutionary dome, inspired by the great European cathedrals but adapted to English taste, promised to create a new landmark on the city's skyline. The sound of chisels carving stone echoed like a prayer in the form of labor. Gardens and squares were incorporated into the new urban plan, creating green spaces that offered respite and beauty amidst the urban density. Young trees were planted along the new avenues, their tender leaves promising shade and coolness for future generations. The scent of flowers planted in the new public gardens began to compete with urban aromas, creating a more fragrant and pleasant city. Artists and artisans found new opportunities to express their creativity in the decoration of the rebuilt buildings. Sculptors created stone ornaments that told the story of the reborn city, while painters decorated interiors with motifs that celebrated overcoming adversity and hope. Art became not just decoration, but a way to document and celebrate collective transformation. The new churches, built according to Wren's innovative designs, created worship spaces that combined tradition and modernity. Their elegant spires and luminous interiors offered environments for prayer that inspired both reverence and hope. The sound of the new bells, precisely tuned, created a celestial music that marked the hours of the reborn city with notes of gratitude and celebration. As the years passed, it became clear that London had not merely recovered from the Great Fire, but had transformed into something greater and more beautiful than it had been before. The city that emerged from the ashes was safer, more organized, more beautiful, and more functional. It was a powerful demonstration that, sometimes, destruction can be the necessary first step towards an even more magnificent creation, and that the human spirit, when tested by adversity, is capable of creating beauty and meaning, even from the most devastating losses. As we prepare for rest this night, we carry with us the profound lessons that emerge from the ashes of the Great Fire of London. This story, which unfolded more than 3 centuries ago, continues to echo in our hearts because it speaks of universal truths about the human condition that transcend time and place. The fire that devastated London in 1666 teaches us that life is, by its very nature, transient and unpredictable. The wooden houses that sheltered families for generations, the shops that sustained entire communities, the precious objects accumulated over a lifetime, all can be turned to ashes in a matter of hours. This fragility, far from being a cause for despair, invites us to value each present moment and to find our security, not in material things, but in human bonds and the values we carry in our hearts. The solidarity that spontaneously emerged during the days of crisis reveals a comforting truth about our nature. When we face genuine adversity, the artificial differences that separate us dissolve, revealing our shared humanity. Wealthy merchants and poor artisans, nobles and commoners, all discovered that, in the face of fire, they were simply human beings needing each other. This lesson resonates deeply in our contemporary world, where we so often divide ourselves by differences that are ultimately superficial. The capacity for reconstruction demonstrated by 17th century Londoners offers hope for our own moments of loss and transformation. They not only rebuilt what had been lost, but created something new and better, incorporating the wisdom gained through the experience of destruction. This is a powerful metaphor for our own personal journey. Every crisis, every loss, every moment of apparent destruction carries within it the potential for a wiser and more beautiful rebirth. The silence that descended upon London after the fire reminds us of the importance of moments of pause and reflection in our fast-paced lives. Sometimes, we need the familiar noise of our routines to be interrupted so that we can hear the deeper voice of our inner wisdom. In these moments of quiet, we find clarity about what truly matters and direction for the next steps of our journey. The story of the Great Fire also teaches us about impermanence as a creative force, not just a destructive one. Medieval London, with all its beauty and charm, had to give way to a safer, more organized, and more beautiful city. Similarly, in our personal lives, we sometimes need to let go of old versions of ourselves to allow who we are meant to become to emerge. As we close our eyes tonight, we can find comfort in the wisdom of the Londoners of 1666, who discovered that true wealth does not lie in material possessions, but in the ability to adapt, to help one another, and to find beauty and meaning even in the most challenging circumstances. Their voices echo through the centuries, whispering words of encouragement that every end is also a beginning, that every loss carries within it the potential for a discovery, and that the human spirit, like the phoenix, always finds a way to rise from the ashes, wiser and stronger than before. May this story accompany us in our dreams, reminding us that we are part of a long and noble lineage of human beings who faced adversity with courage, who found hope in darkness, and who always found a way to rebuild life with more wisdom and beauty than before. Good night, and may your dreams be populated by the soft music of reconstruction and the golden light of renewed hope.